is Ibrahim. I'm a friend of HEC. It is important for me to be here to share our experience with regard to dealing with climate resilience across Africa with a student here at HEC for two reasons. Number one, I think the world we live in today, there should be a bridge between the academic world, what I call the real world, and which is the world that we belong to, and building climate resilience. So I think by being here, we managed through 45 minutes of conversation and making the link in the way that we can all be part of the solution. I think the second reason why I want to be here is because what the university has to offer is precisely what we're dealing with as challenge in my organization, and that is data management, risk profiling, in some cases, innovative responses dealing with climate change. I think by being here, not only sharing our experience with the student, we manage at least find out ways in which to join forces so we can all build climate resilience across the continent so no one is left behind, particularly the most vulnerable people. Well, we identify with, I should say, three areas where we can work together. I mentioned earlier, we are in the business of climate resilience, and the starting point for any climate resilience is have visibility and understanding of your risk profile, so data management. It is extremely critical to get that right, because if you don't, your model are not credible, and eventually countries will not actually follow. So after 13 years of doing this, we are at the stage where it's very important we get data management right, and I hope with the collaboration with HEC, we'll find a way to actually improve our data management and make our models more credible. I think the second part, equally important with the school, is the fact that today it's not just providing financing, it's also building capacity so African countries can do it themselves. We call it in Africa, African solution to African problems, but this could be done in partnership with that organization. I think HEC brings a lot to the table. Last but not least, there's a lot of knowledge management, thought leadership in climate actions, and I believe academia and ourselves combined, certainly we can make sure we can showcase what we can do together between academia and the practical world. I think the first thing that a student can or should do is a mindset that comes across that they can be part of the solution. And I think by being here and sharing our practical experience in the real world, it is a way of actually exposing the students actually the problematics that we're faced with in climate risk. And I believe that students will actually walk away, be inspired that they can be part of the solution when it comes to climate actions. I think second, as I say, the link between research and development at the academic level to the one in the real world, it's a way of making sure the students can actually be doing in their research, in their theses, and dealing with topics that are of interest to us, because ultimately what we want to do is find innovative solutions that we can utilize and build the climate resilience across Africa. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity of welcoming some of the students, to ARCS. They can have access to tremendous data on climate resilience and use the data to begin to help us to improve our modeling, the way we actually manage data, but also the way we use data to early warning system and actually making informed decisions. So I have no doubt our collaborations, as you see, will yield some tangible result, which will help us to do our job better in saving Africa. Well, let's take, for example, drought, which is something that many Africans, particularly our member states, are faced with tremendous consequences in terms of food insecurity. And the way actually drought has been addressed in most of these countries is sort of business as usual. You wait till actually the disaster happens and you find yourself with limited resources as the government, and eventually going to the international community trying to mobilize resources. By the time the money is available, it may be too late, because in the business of disaster management, every second count. So it's really important to actually innovate. And I think in that direction, where I think students can really help us is to make sure the way we actually model our risk in a way that data are reliable, the modelings are accurate. And I believe in most of the universities, HEC included, tremendous research done in looking at improving modeling. So if you can get that expertise available to us at ARC, I bet it will help us to be more credible, but also to be more responsive to the demand of our member states. So we can all collectively recognize that the global climate crisis call for global solidarity, academia included. Basically, COP29 is dubbed as the climate finance, and that is expectation is quite high in terms of additional resources, but also honoring existing commitment to climate finance. So I think the expectation will be that when we get to COP29, we're going to renew this commitment, but make more pledges so we can address adaptations and the funding needs across the continent. I think second, as I mentioned many times, and that is to say the problem is real. If you look at what happened recently in Southern Africa with drought, these are reminders that climate change really has a human face, where many people on the continent actually are affected by the devastation of climate change. So I think what I expect to see is that those problems basically are dealt with in a way that we can build a more resilient Africa. So at the COP29, my hope and expectation is number one, more resources available, directed the way it's needed in Africa in terms of dealing with resilience, but also empowering existing African organizations like ourselves. We've been doing it for 13 years, so we can scale up and be bigger, more impactful, so that no one is left behind across Africa. And I think that's really the merit of showcasing what we do in Africa and make sure that with more resources, more political will, we can do more on the continent and make sure no one is left behind.
They won't understand it, or it's about politicians.
Right.
And the argument.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately politics matters, but it's not only politics that will likely lead to building resilience. So the first step, in my view, is just making sure there's a political commitment and will to addressing the crisis of climate change. And I think our organization, ARC, the mere fact that it was actually created by the African Union, demonstrate a continental leadership in being part of the solutions, and that's a good step. That continental leadership also should translate at the country level, so our politicians or decision makers begin to recognize the importance of being at the forefront and demonstrate that actually you are addressing the climate crisis. I think second, and this is something we push a lot at ARC, a country should have what I call a national disasters management strategy or policy. Because ultimately, that's how you connect the political will to the strategy that you have, to your vision as a country. And then the next step is, do you actually have the capabilities that could deal with the impact of climate change? And that's where we come in with our partners in making sure we can actually equip our countries to basically deal with the climate crisis. Just one example. One of the things, for example, that countries need to do to lower the global temperature to less than 2% is what we call the NDC, the Nationally Determined Contribution. But this is voluntary for all the countries. And some countries in Africa, even though they have the will to contribute, they may not actually have the capabilities. So we actually have it within ourselves to build their capacity so they can actually honor their pledges when it comes to the lowering the global temperature. And I think ultimately, what is also important, you need to see tangible results. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a big passion of making sure that we don't lose sight of the human face of climate change. And that is, if we do everything that I talked about, if we can't prove we are saving lives, obviously we're not being impactful. What's important here to highlight, 39 member states, it's a community. And within that community, each of them has best practices, example that we can showcase. And I think what's important to build that ecosystem whereby among themselves they can really learn for what countries do best so that we can build the capacity within the community. I think second, the innovation of what we do at ARC is remarkable in the sense, as I said earlier, in the case of disastrous management in dealing to climate, what had happened, every second count. If you get too late with a response, it may be too late, you can't save lives. So what we're saying is, instead of getting countries to get the risk to the insurance market on their own separately with higher premium, pull the risk together so you can go there together. I think that sense of just community, in my view, that's the biggest value addition to dealing with the climate crisis. And our value addition is the fact that when crises happen in climate, when you actually get the resources available to government as fast as possible, it's a life and death situation. And I think that's really what we want to push. To the extent government understand that governing is anticipating. And if you wait when it's too late, it may be too late. But countries are doing remarkably well. What I've seen in our case of ARC, the countries that see the benefit of ARC are our biggest advocate. And I've seen heads of state at the AU summit making a call to action. We need to give more resources to ARC because they see the benefit of ARC. And I think that's what we want to do, to make sure they become our ambassadors as we go to AU summit and talk about what we do and do best. Well, the school, I should say, is very special to me, as I mentioned earlier, for two reasons. And about in the 70s doesn't make me any younger. It's certainly revealed my age, but my uncle actually was the first graduate from university. It happened to be here in HEC. And when he came back from France, I watched him, rising up and having leadership positions. And that's my first view or even inspiration from what you could do with university. And obviously inspired me to go beyond just finishing high school and go to university to get my degrees, which I have today. But I realized at that particular moment the power of learning, of education, and eventually also the power of making a difference. Now, obviously, beyond just the university, it also inspired me when I got my education. My first job when I got my education was to work in some villages in Senegal, trying to increase access to water supply to communities, particularly women who don't have access to water supply. When I look back at that particular experience in Senegal, that's the most proudest moment of my life because I felt like I made a difference in the life of many women who don't have access to water. So the combination of HEC inspired me and also my mission-driven attitude to career. As such today, I describe myself as an African who cares about Africa, mission-driven, not career-driven.